Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today, it's our privilege to bring you the second in a three-week series on Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, allies in transition. This topic has been chosen and has been a symposium that's sponsored by Lewis Clark State College from Lewiston, Idaho, in cooperation with North Idaho College. And I again want to express Steve Schink and the staff and my pleasure that that institution has been willing to cooperate with us in this series and bring these distinguished guests to our campus. In our second program, I'm very happy to welcome to the program Virginia Scott Simmons. Our guest comes to us from Australia. At the present time, she is the acting director of Broadmeadows College of Technical and Further Education in Melbourne, Australia. Our guest has a baccalaureate degree, and she holds a Master's of Education in Administration in her work that I've just indicated. Her credentials are long. She's accomplished in many efforts and tasks, and I will not take time from the program to deal with all of those, but to allow us the opportunity to ask questions. But let me welcome you to the city of Coeur d'Alene and to the state of Idaho and to the Northwest. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
And I'm very happy to welcome regular panelist Steve Schink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and it's my pleasure to invite Steve Schink to commence the questioning.
Thank you. As Tony indicated, you're here today as part of a cooperative program with Lewis Clark State College, North Idaho College, and the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce. But this isn't the only stop on your tour. Would you tell us a little bit about the other places you have visited or are going to visit?
Yes, well, yesterday we spent most of the day at the College of Southern Idaho. I was fortunate to fly in on Saturday night and get over my jet lag and be able to spend a really full day at the college yesterday. We started at 8 o'clock and I spent most of the time looking at the programs there, going right over the college and even getting into some quite interesting debates with some of the staff members there. In the evening there was a general panel at one of the hotels in Twin Falls where members of the business and industry community of Twin Falls were invited to listen to a range of speakers, generally on the topic of allies in transition, with an Australia-New Zealand focus.
Is this your first visit to the United States?
It is, yes.
You had a chance yesterday to visit the only other community college campus in Idaho, College of Southern Idaho. I hope you've had a little bit of an opportunity today to see something of North Idaho College, because as I understand from some of your earlier remarks, those two institutions, NIC and CSI, are probably closest to the institution which you're the president of or the director of in Australia. Is that correct?
Yes, that's...
Tell us a little bit about the similarities and the differences.
Well, I think the similarities is that they're both striving to provide very flexible education for the whole range of the adult population, and in some way or another you find that the programs are very similar. The Australian and American cultures are very similar too, so you get the same cultural problems and cultural similarities, and they're reflected in the programs that are offered. I've found really the more I've looked and the more I've heard about what's happening here, the more I find that they are indeed very similar. They're the main things, I'd say. Let's
talk about students for a minute. We have at North Idaho College, and you use the word range. Range is a good term for us to use as well. Everything from an advanced placement high school student who's taking a course or two here to students in their 50s, 60s, and sometimes even 70s who are returning to school for a variety of reasons, maybe pursuing a new career or just for general interest and personal improvement. Is that also the case in Australia,
yes.
Your institution?
Yes, we started about the same point and we go right through. We say we'll take anyone up to age 80. I think our oldest student so far, and we're only 3 years old, has been 74.
Only 3 years old. Is it a new institution?
It's a new institution.
Is it a new movement in Australia, or have institutions like yours been around for some time?
They've been around for about 15 years now, but they've developed over the last 5 years, I'd say, to be more like your institutions are. It's new because there was a great need in the area where the college is. There'd been community pressure for about 7 years to get a college up and running, and finally, politically, the situation was right for the politicians to be able to make an announcement in that area, and often that's the way it happens. And so the college was established and it opened at the beginning of 1986. So we are very new, but already we had 7,000 students in our second year and defied all the planners' predictions about what was needed and how many students we'd get. We think in 1988 we'll have about 9,000 students.
Now, are those full-time students? Or?
Mostly part-time. They'd be very similar to your student population. There wouldn't be more than 1,000 full-time students. Most of our students come in on a part-time basis, and a very large proportion of them come at night. I'd say that we're actually busier in the evening than we are during the day overall. Our facilities run at about a 98% usage for our evening programs. We also open on Saturdays and offer quite a range of programs on Saturdays as well.
Shifting to a look at your program offerings, I wonder if the similarities continue there. Here at North Idaho College, we have a very strong vocational technical component. We offer paraprofessional programs designed for to move a student upon completion into immediate employment, and of course we have a lot of students who transfer on to senior institutions to further their education. Do you find that same kind of cross-section?
Yes, very similar mix. In fact, the arrangement that this college has with Lewis Clark is even duplicated in our situation. We have an arrangement with the Deakin University in Melbourne to send our students to their programs after they've completed with us, so it is very similar, and their programs actually run on our campus. We have similar arrangements with other universities for articulation of our programs, so we're so similar that it's almost uncanny.
Give us an idea, if you would please, specifically of the kind of vocational and associate's degree programs that you offer.
Yes, well, the vocational programs are predominantly in the trade areas, and that starts with things like fitting and machining, electrical electronics, carpentry and joinery, cabinet making, cookery, that's very big and growing area, part of the hospitality industry. We have a program called private order dressmaking, which equips people to run their own fashion business. It's like very much like a program I saw at the College of Southern Idaho. In the other areas, we have a wide range of secretarial, computing and business studies programs such as accounting, sales and marketing, management, retail, banking, off the top of my head. And then we have a wide range of community education programs, as we call them, that are similar to many of your programs too, in English as a second language, foreign languages, basic education and literacy, and then a range of programs in a field that we call social and community services, which caters for people entering the community development industry but who aren't necessarily social workers, and a lot of them are involved with ethnic communities. Then we have a range of what we call labour market programs, which are federally funded programs for targeted groups with some sort of disadvantage, such as unemployment or people coming off pensions, people who have been targeted for some particular reason with federal funds. And then we have what we call training and development, which is a special unit that's set up to tailor-make industry programs to meet their needs. So it's very similar.
And I'll ask one more question, because I'd have people here at North Idaho College who'd be upset with me if I didn't also mention continuing education. Many of our students follow the pattern you described exactly. Many of them come in the evenings or on weekends. And although they can take many of the regular course offerings that day students do, a number of those evening students are taking continuing education or special interest courses, so just for fun or for personal enrichment. You offer the same kinds of things?
We did in our first year, but our facilities are under so much pressure that we had to, at the end of our first year, put all our what we call hobby and leisure programs off campus. And in 1988, with pressures of facilities again, we've geared away from that. But we have other providers in our area that cater for those sorts of programs through different other arrangements. And so they are at the bottom of the priority list because we've got a very strong economic imperative that runs through our programs, and we have certainly vocational programs and preparatory programs for further education or for vocational, taking up a vocation, take the first priority. But I'd have to say that that provision is still there in our community through what we call neighbourhood houses and community groups that work at the grass level. They're self-help groups. They do get some government funding, and there are a number of them situated in our region. What we mostly do is provide support for them to help them to teach better, but we don't run the programs ourselves very much anymore. It would be nominal, the amount that we have in those programs.
In the United States, we have colleges, such as North Idaho College, but they're very different in composition. And North Idaho College, first of all, it's a very old institution, created in 1933, and what we call community colleges in this country came into being mostly in the 1960s. And we're different, too, and from many that we're about 90% academic and about 10% vocational. And we have a large number of students that transfer after 2 years here in pre-law or pre-med or pre-dental engineering, so forth, business. And then, as Steve has indicated, in addition to those two populations of the 1 or 2 year vocational program of about 10% and the 9% who are in academic, we have a lot of paraprofessional, but a lot of those direct themselves into academic programs later to transfer. So I say all that to ask you this about your institution. How do you break down between, I suppose your terminology is different, between your vocational programs and your academic, where they would transfer toward a baccalaureate degree at a 4-year institution or university?
That's probably one of the differences. We don't have that same flexibility. It's impossible in Australia to do, say, what you call pre-law and pre-med. A student going into law or medicine must start and finish at a university. In medicine it's a 6-year course, and in law it's about 4 years. We can't do the commencing years for those people, but we can do it in Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science, and that's where we're working. Specifically in the arts area, we're concentrating on journalism because it's not very widely available in our area, and in science it's in the area of dietetics.
So you have more of a concentration as you relate to other institutions.
Oh, there's another what we call 2-tier course, which can close at the end of 2 years and finish with an associate diploma, or you can go on and do a final year to pick up a Bachelor of Arts degree. And they're being increasingly introduced into our college. Example, the community development one that I mentioned before is an example of that. And fields like accounting and operations management, they all go on into that area, but certainly not law and not med.
I guess for my next question, I'm trying to test some students that we've had here from Australia. We've had some wonderful students from your beautiful country, and one of the comments that I get from them all the time, and there may be a lot of validity to this, and also maybe pride, as we all have in our country, they indicate to me that that education is much more rigid in Australia. The requirements through what we would call our high school level is much greater, and they come here and they contend that their first year of college is somewhat of a repeat of their year. Do you have any way of comparing the type of requirements that your students have as they come into the college level compared with the United States? What I'm asking you really basically is, what are the basic requirements that a student must go through to graduate? And I'm thinking of the senior examinations, which we don't have. Could you kind of walk us through some of those requirements?
Well, it varies. I'm surprised to hear that they're making that comment. Certainly, if you take a purely academic stream and go to university, there's a requirement to to complete a particular statewide certificate called the Higher School Certificate, which is moderated across the state, and the point score that people get on that particular examination becomes their entry point into higher education in a lot of instances. And that's where they'd be talking about rigidities, I think. People get very uptight about their point score. And there are certain known point scores that you have to get in order to get into certain areas. The more prestigious areas, say like medicine, require a very high point score. But in the technical and further education system, we actually do credit industrial experience as an entry requirement into our courses. So I guess it's a second route to higher education. People who've been working in industry for some years are deemed to have the appropriate mature age experience for entry into courses, and certainly can do it that way. But for the young student leaving high school, those point scores are very important to them.
Do all students take exactly the same test no matter what they choose to do beyond? Is it a uniform test for all high school students?
Some of them don't take it, but most of them who want to keep their options open for every possible form of study do.
But in any part of the country it's the same exam, is that correct?
Any part of our state it's the same
Yes.
exam.
Yes.
Not the same across the country, but the same across the state.
The exam itself, I think this is a very interesting comparison or contrast actually with our system. What are the disciplines that are covered on the exam? Is it a very broad exam?
People have some core subjects and some electives to choose from. So they do examinations in 5 or 6 areas and get they get their point scores from their best 3 results.
2 other questions before we turn to Steve. One is, how many hours a day at the high school level are they in school? And secondly, what type of time is consumed in homework beyond the day at school?
I'll talk about the final year because it's different from year to year. They're in high school really from 9 till 4. They may have some free periods, but they're not free to really go home during that time. So they would be expected to undertake some private study in the library or somehow utilise their time productively. The amount of homework that they put in can vary enormously, but because of the importance of the outcome of the year, students tend to spend very long hours doing homework in order to achieve the best possible result they can. That's not necessarily very well prepared for in the year previously, where they will not spend as much time in homework. But the last year of high school tends to be a rather frantic rush for good results for a lot of our students.
Thank you. Steve?
What about your faculty? Where are they coming from by and large? Are they professional educators? Do you, especially in your vocational component, do you reach into private industry to find people with professional backgrounds that they can relate in the classroom?
Yes, we do. I think our faculty or our staff, as we call them, is different from yours in that about 70% of our staff would have permanent tenure. And even though they come to us from industry, if we decide that we will employ them, part of that employment involves putting them through a 2 or 1 year course of teacher training, depending on their qualifications at the time of employment. And we send them off to a teacher's college and pay them the full wage to do that. It's quite a costly system, but we do put them through that teacher training program. That's 70%. The other 30% tend to be people who we have to get straight from industry because of their expertise. They work during the day and they come to the college during the night or in their off time to teach, and we pay them a sessional rate for that. By and large, we try and put them through a teacher training program too. It's a much more condensed program, but it's offered through the Teacher Training Institute, and we'll pay them to go to do that, or at least support them to some extent to do that on Saturdays or during the evening. So there is a very heavy emphasis on teacher training, but for that group of people, it's not compulsory. They get a lot of support, professional support from the permanent teachers who help them to acclimatise to the teaching environment and help them with a lot of teaching materials. But that's the difference. So we have to put aside quite a substantial portion of our budget every year to train incoming staff who are coming in from industry to take up permanent jobs, and we'll train them accordingly.
I'm curious about the demographics of your faculty and administrators. Here at North Idaho College, a little better than half of our full-time faculty are women. But in most places in the country, while there are a number of women in community college administration, they are still a distinct minority. That's changing slowly, but it's definitely the case. Are most of your colleagues in Australia male, or are you typical of what we would call community college?
I'm anything but typical. There are 33 colleges, similar colleges in the state, and there are 2 female directors out of the 33, and that's only been in the last 18 months. I took up the position of director about 18 months ago now, and we're both in acting positions. The permanency of the position is about to come up in both cases. Certainly most of the directors of colleges are male, as are most of the central bureaucracy, which is quite substantial too in the State Training Board. Our college, though, was set up with a clear equal opportunity policy, and there was a very strong attempt to implement affirmative action in the employment of staff. I initially came into the college as deputy and moved into the director's position. The director was male at that time. At the next level of what we call associate directors, on the teaching side there are 2 females and 2 males, and on the support side there are 2 females and 1 male. So in our management staff of our college, we've got a good mix of males and females, and so on down the line. I think after that we've got about a 50-50 mix of males and females. We haven't been able to reflect that very successfully in our student population as yet, particularly in the vocational areas. We are trying to attract females into the vocational areas. We have an equal opportunity officer whose job it is to do precisely that, and we have a very extensive schools liaison program with our 51 feeder schools. We're working on it, but we haven't gone as far as we'd like to.
What are the growth areas for your students? What programs do you see most new students coming into today?
Computing and business studies. Secretarial is also very strong. Hospitality is a real boom area, and tourism training. There's a very high demand for that. And in some of the language areas, such as Japanese. Electronics is very big in our area because we have the multinational company called Ericsson's, which doesn't seem to be very familiar to people in the US, but that's a very big Swedish telecommunications company which is situated near us, and so we have a very high demand for training in electronics. They'd be, I think, the major areas.
I would like to discuss funding. That's always a dominating issue in our country, and I see from your smile that it must be so in Australia.
It certainly is.
Compared with other aspects of society and funding for those programs and all, how does education come out, and particularly funding for salaries for your staff, as compared with other fundings that take place within the budgetary process?
Well, I think the government has seen the technical and further education system as a very important mechanism to really strengthen the skills of the nation, and there's been quite a number of government reports and union reports, both at state and federal level, which have really underpinned that need. And so we have been finding that by and large our funding has been increasing, maybe not substantially, but it has been holding its own against all the other sectors over the most recent years. At our college level, we have to go through quite protracted and difficult budget sessions with our State Training Board, and they started off for 1988 by cutting us by about 10% right across the board, which was very severe. But we had ways of winning that back, and the ways to win it back were to demonstrate that we were coming up with new initiatives and new directions that would be meeting government economic priorities. And we put up quite a range of new initiatives, about 10 altogether, and we were able to maintain our funding base as a result of doing that. So we came out marginally better in 1988 than we were in 87.
I assume from your comments, though, that industry pays better than you do in education. So does that create a problem for you to try to recruit staff from industry to teach when they're, I would assume, doing better financially in industry?
Yes, it does, and that's been a problem that has been very difficult to address. Just recently, our teachers have received quite a big increase in their salary, and I would say that overall, on a per annum basis, every teacher's salary went up by about $4,000, which was a very big increase. They had to come up with a number of productivity trade-offs in order to get that increased salary, and they did that. But some of the things that might be of interest to staff here, that a couple of the trade-offs were to do with increasing their own skills, and we have to, as part of our budgetary process, we now have to release a number of staff into industry every year as an entitlement to staff to upgrade their skills. For us in 1988, that's the equivalent of 2.8 full-time teaching staff, which translated could mean about 10 members of staff for 3 months each, or 20 members of staff for 6 weeks each. Every member of staff also has, as an entitlement, the equivalent of 1 full week for staff development, and they've got the capacity to give more and get more. If they give another week of their time and they get 10 weeks leave, we'll pay for another week as well. So they're all built in now into their terms and conditions, and I think it's making quite a big difference.
But it is part of the responsibility of your budgetary system in your institution that you are funding that period of time for them.
Yes, we do. And perhaps I should emphasise again, if I didn't make it clear, that we don't really get any funding from industry of any substantial degree, and we're different from you in that respect. It's all state funded.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but our time is up. You've been delighted on the program. It's so informative, and I know Steve joins me in thanking you, as our staff does. And again, we're so happy to have you in our city.
Thank you, and thank you for your very warm hospitality since I've been here.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Virginia Scott Simmons discussing Education Australia. We'll finish our series next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.